Silver Age is the newest Flesh and Blood format, and with full support from LSS, fast-paced gameplay, and extremely cheap decks, it could very well be the thing to launch Flesh and Blood into a new era of unprecedented growth. Or it could fizzle out into nothing. Sage is a format that uses young heroes and 55 card decks with main decks of exactly 40 cards. So it's just like Blitz, except it's limited to only commons and rares. This limitation does a lot for the format, not only with accessibility, but also complexity and longevity. However, this also leaves it with both pros and cons, and so today I want to dive into whether or not it's actually worth it to play Silver Age. The number one complaint that I, and I'm sure all of you hear about Flesh and Blood from people outside of the game, is that it's just too damn expensive. In a time where there are more card games than ever to play, many people who might have tried Fab simply look at other games when confronted with classic constructed decks that range from $400 to $1,000. But Silver Age? Dude, this format is dirt cheap. Decks cost anywhere from $10 to $40, with the higher end typically being decks that have cards from older Armory decks like Run Roughshod and KO. But for the most part, you can build a fully tuned Sage deck for an average of $25 or so, making this format even cheaper than Pokemon. You know, the game that everyone points to when comparing the prices of TCGs, Sage is cheaper than that. On top of that, aside from the Armory deck exclusive, cards are pretty easy to get considering commons and rares are pretty plentiful. If your local store does any box openings at all, then they've probably got most of what you need, but even if they don't, your actual local players might. And even if you have to go online, it's very easy and very cheap to source everything. One issue with a format like CC isn't just the price. Sometimes it's actually finding the cards you need without having to buy from several different stores and paying a buttload of shipping. But even better than that are the upcoming precons, which I am so excited for. Fully tuned decks, that's right, with a sideboard and a pack of Compendium of Wraith for $20 USD. Come February of 2026, you can legitimately go to your locals, pick up a deck with a bonus pack, and immediately start playing competitively. You will legitimately be on the exact same level as everyone else. These aren't the typical structure decks where you get a somewhat tuned list that still needs to be upgraded. No, these are already upgraded and tuned for competitive play out of the box, or at least they promise them to be. But even if you want to make a few changes to the precons, again, the format is so cheap and easy to get cards for. And that also helps when it comes to playing different decks. See, I'm the type of player where, while I have my favorites, I like playing a bit of everything. And while this is not possible for me to do with fully tuned CC decks, I can absolutely build 14 different tuned Silver Age decks, which I have by the way, and you can too. See, this is important because one very unique thing they are adding to this format is that players get to vote on which heroes get banned for the season or multiple seasons if they keep getting voted out. And if the hero you were playing was one of those decks, then you'll be forced to pivot. Now in Classic Constructed, this was always rough when your heroes LL'd as you'd have to invest in a whole new deck, but in Sage, you can just pick up another precon or build a new deck for cheap. And you might not even need all new cards. Say Briar gets voted out. You can easily take a good chunk of your deck and change it to Aurora and get a similar experience, and you'll only need a handful of new cards. Because that's another great part of accessibility, the sheer amount of heroes. In Classic Constructed, when a hero hits Living Legend, it can take some time before there's a new one that replaces them and makes your cards playable again. But in Sage, most heroes have a close enough counterpart that you can hop to if your deck is banned for the season. Sure, not all of them are going to be good, but if the best version of a deck gets banned, like Oldhim, well, then you can pivot to Terra and get the next best thing, which might just become the best thing with the format changes. But the fact that you can pretty much build whatever you want and have multiple decks makes this format so easy to get into and enjoy. I think it goes without saying that Silver Age, especially with the precons, is going to be Flesh and Blood's most accessible format by a large margin, as long as it's popular. But I think this is going to be great for growing locals where the game might be struggling or even non-existent. However, the success of the format doesn't just depend on accessibility, it also needs to be fun to play. And on that topic, well, it's a bit more nuanced. Silver Age's gameplay is very fast and much less complicated than Classic Constructed. Without the Majestics and Legendaries, which tend to be the most interesting and complex cards, the format is a little more face-up with less tricks and cards to play around. Sure, you still have things like traps and attack reactions, but you don't have Revel in Runeblood and a widespread annihilation, or a Codex of Frailty and Leave No Witnesses ruining your day. Now, this isn't to say Sage is a brain-dead format, it's just that with a smaller and more limiting card pool, it relies more on your overall skills with Flesh and Blood than it does on specific interactions or matchups. While you still need to learn how to play your deck into other heroes, it's far more important that you understand hand values, who has tempo, and life ranges. With only 20 life and some still really powerful things to do in the format, understanding the game state and knowing how to maximize your hands is key here. You won't need to know what specific cards to pitch stack for turn 15 against a specific hero in this format, but you will need to learn how to recognize when it's time to block or when it's time to take a big hit to send an even bigger attack back. And this is both a pro and a con, all depending on what you want to get out of Flesh and Blood. See, Fab at its core is a very complex game with a near endless amount of interactions, and with each turn drawing up new hands, you're constantly having to think on the fly and make the best out of each turn. With 40 life in both Majestic and Legendaries, Classic Constructed is a format where player skill is at its peak. Not only do you need to understand the fundamentals of the game, but you also need to deeply understand the current meta matchups in order to truly succeed at this game competitively. And this depth and skill expression is something that a lot of players love about the game. It's the whole draw for them. And so for those players, Sage might be a bit too tuned down, a bit too simple and lacking in those in-depth interactions and skill expressions that made them love Fab in the first place. For those players, the ones who play endless amounts of games every week, this format might just be a bit too boring for them and not what they want to do with the game. And that's perfectly fair. Like, I can very much respect enjoying the difficulty and challenge that CC offers. But on the other hand, most people who play card games do it as a hobby. Not everyone has the time, energy, or drive to dive headfirst into the depth of this game, and so Flesh and Blood CC format might not be as fun for them. But Silver Age? Well, with the format being less complex and faster, those semi-competitive and casual players might enjoy it more than Classic Constructed. Even for me personally, I spend a ton of my time with this game, but it's with making these videos. The downside to having a channel entirely dedicated to Flesh and Blood is that it means I spend less time playing the game. For every 1 hour I play, I probably spend between 5 to 10 hours working on videos. And so while I love this game and spend a lot of time in it, I don't get the time to really be up to date entirely with everything in the meta. And while I'm a competent enough player to top 4 31 player ProQuest, I'm still far behind those who are at the top of this game competitively. But Sage? Man, I have been having so much fun with this format. I mean, I'm doing a side gameplay series, so it's probably pretty obvious, but seriously, I actually like the fact that I can rely on my overall knowledge of the game and not need to know every specific matchup to a T just to win. There are times where I sit down to play CC and just get stomped by the bad matchup because I haven't had the time to actually sit down and work it out. And this can be a really frustrating experience, especially when the game lasts 40 minutes and I'm clearly losing the whole time. Ultimately, your enjoyment of Sage is going to depend a lot on what you're looking for with Flesh and Blood. Maybe you only like the complexity and depth for full formats like CC, maybe you prefer the more simple and powered out gameplay of Sage, or heck, maybe you're like me and you enjoy both. Whatever it is, your enjoyment or lack thereof with Silver Age is going to be entirely dependent on you as a player. But with how cheap decks are, I say you should at least give it an honest go before you decide how you feel. Because whether you like it or not, I do think Sage will be sticking around for quite some time. With any new format in Flesh and Blood comes the question, okay, but is it actually going to stick? From day one, we've had the Premier format, Classic Constructed, but there was also Blitz, Commoner, Ultimate Pit Fight, Living Legend, and now Silver Age. While Blitz used to be popular, it has faded into the background, and Sage is essentially replacing it at competitive events. Commoner has never really taken off, Ultimate Pit Fight is literally never talked about, and even Living Legend has yet to be fully embraced, as people seem to just prefer playing Classic Constructed. And so with the juggernaut that is CC, and with a limited player base, it remains to be seen whether Silver Age will actually stick around for a long time or if it will eventually fade into oblivion. However, I think that there are a few solid reasons that Silver Age is very likely to be successful. The first reason is that LSS is fully supporting the format. Not only are the precons going to be huge for expanding it to existing and new players, but there are also a ton of competitive events lined up for Sage. Even before the precons release date, we've got Battle Hardens lined up for Akihabara, Hong Kong, and Seattle. And in 2026, we're going to have Skirmish and ProQuest seasons for it, and it's also been confirmed it will be at the highest levels of play, including Pro Tour Yokohama. So whether you're just looking to go to your local PQs and skirmishes, or travel for a chance at the big bucks, then Sage will be competitively supported, which is huge for the success of the format. Give people a reason to play it, and they will. But on top of that, they are also designing cards for the format moving forward. We've already seen Compendium of Wraith have new equipment and cards like the new defense reactions to fill the holes of Sink Below and Fate Foreseen, and so as more and more cards are designed specifically for Silver Age, it will help grow and diversify the format. Now, the second reason I think this is sticking around is because it's also great for casual play. Because Silver Age is both cheap and a bit simpler, the format can be played both competitively and casually pretty successfully. Now, sure, Fab is a more competitive game and likely always will be, but with everyone having equal access to everything, it gives more casual players the ability to play and win without having to grind as hard as the most competitive players. They won't win as often, but I do believe Sage evens the playing field quite a bit more than Classic Constructed. And this is really important because the price and difficulty have absolutely been a barrier to entry for this game. Making it easier to get into it on both fronts will be very advantageous to help convince people to try Flesh and Blood, whether they want to go to events or just play at locals or at home with their friends. And that leads us to the third reason, is that this format will be great for local game stores. Now this one is a bit more hypothetical because it does rely on the other two aspects succeeding, but hear me out. If Sage becomes a big format and people really enjoy it and are building decks for it, this will help in two ways. First, it will absolutely bring more people into the game, which is good for stores on its own, but it will then also convert some people to Classic Constructed, which helps push sales of boxes, armory decks, and singles. And second, on the topic of singles, even Sage itself will help stores that open boxes to sell the cards. Everyone knows that when you open a box, you get a handful of useful cards and a whole lot of bulk, but now some of that bulk has use where it might not have in CC or Living Legend. On top of that, I can see Sage popularizing some rares to the point where they're worth a couple bucks each, like Humble, and this can help push the profit margins for stores just a little bit higher. Because let's be real, most LGSs don't make a ton of profit, so adding a bit more value to what would otherwise be bulk can be very advantageous for them. Now, while I think these three aspects will help the format's longevity a lot, there is one thing that can either help or hinder it: that rotation system. As I said, Silver Age is using a voting system where we, the players, can vote a few heroes out for a season, with LSS getting a single choice as well. If a hero is voted out for a second time, they're gone for 2 seasons, and on and on. And I can foresee this either doing really well or really poorly. On one hand, if heroes like Briar or Old Him are too oppressive, players can vote them out until the rest of the format rises to meet them over time, or the ban list takes a chunk out of them. On the other hand though, players can assess things wrong and keep hitting heroes who might no longer be an actual problem, and there is also the concern of people like me, content creators. While I don't think anyone is going to try and psyop everyone into thinking their least favorite deck is the boogeyman of the format, I do think that the sway creators can hold with their opinions could have negative repercussions. That said, it is way too early to know if this system will work or not. I'm sure there will be some issues, but I hope it mostly goes fine and does what it's intended to do. It'll suck if people vote out your favorite hero, but again, it's very easy to pivot decks in Sage, so it won't be nearly as much of an issue as it would be in other formats. I just hope that LSS is willing to pull the plug in the case that the players are making poor decisions and hurting the format more than helping. I also hope they tie the voting system to your gem account so that no one can bot the voting system or vote more than once, as that would destroy the whole point. That said, with everything to consider, I do think that Sage has serious lasting power. The biggest factor here is the sheer support and sets, products, and even events that LSS is doing. As long as they keep directly supporting it, I can see Sage being here to stay far longer than Blitz and being far more popular than UPF or Commoner. So all this brings us back to the question: is it worth it to play Silver Age? Well, if you're a competitive player, you've got no choice. They're putting it into everything, including the Pro Tour, so you're gonna have to play it whether you like it or not. But I do think when it comes to the average player who's going to armories and playing at skirmishes and PQs nearby, it's all going to come down to whether or not it's popular at your locals and what kind of games you want. If you really only want the longer, more in-depth, complex games of CC, then you probably won't enjoy Silver Age much at all. I have seen a few competitive grinders say just as much, where they like having to play around certain cards or combos, and Sage is just too simple for them, which is perfectly understandable and I can respect that. But if you're more casual, don't have as much time or money for that matter, or you're like me where you're into the game but spend a lot of time doing other things, then I think Sage is a great format to be playing. Having commons and rares brings the power level down enough where it's not always a total blowout, but you can still string together some really good turns with a lot of these decks. You are still getting the Flesh and Blood experience, it's just more focused on the core skills rather than specific matchup nuances and expertise. Games are also much faster, so if you either want short armories or the ability to play 6+ games in a couple hours, then this format is right up your alley. So while it depends on the player, I think for most people, Silver Age is absolutely worth it to play. It's fun, it's cheap, and it's going to be competitively supported for a long time, it seems. Maybe it won't outshine CC, but I do think it'll be a very strong secondary format for the game. That said, I am curious to hear what you all think. Do you find this format fun and engaging, or are you on the side of it being a bit too shallow for your liking? I'm really interested to hear what you all think about the format, so please comment down below. But I do think that will be all for this video. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all the patrons. Huge shoutouts to the GigaChads Geeks First, Elixir, Vinny, John, Ty, Chemical, and Dark Memoria. Then we've got the Alpha Chats, Thomas, Zajima, Approximo, and Mike. And then there's the Super Chats, Cece, Ben, Yogbadoodles21, Kevin, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Thanks again as always, and until next time, stay Chadly, my friends.